I'd like to get a few things straight before we dive into my thoughts on the Hulu original film. I don't think it fair to compare a director or writer's current work off of their previous offerings. It's about quality control, not content style. I'm not expecting all of Clive's output to reflect Hellraiser or Nightbreed. On a personal note, I've been a fan of the anthology format since the early 90s, and frankly, with more recent anemic offerings like Del Toro's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and Sam Raimi's 50 States of Fright, I was really pulling for this one. Add to that, I was banking on this being Clive Barker's big return. I'm not trying to play streaming elitist, but when I heard that this anthology was coming to Hulu, it gave me pause. I don't know of any high profile shows or films exclusive to Hulu, so it seemed like an odd choice of all services for this premiere. A brief history lesson. The Books of Blood is a 6-volume collection of short stories, averaging about 5 stories each. Many of these stories have actually already been adapted into films, most prominently Candyman and The Midnight Meat Train starring Bradley Cooper. So, after that introduction, I can start the review proper. A Ukrainian mercenary is sent to take out the whistleblower that leaked the emails from Joe Biden's son to Rudy Giuliani. A rare book collector is assaulted by a hitman looking for information.
Guess you could say that was long overdue. Get it? Because we're in a library.
When he gets the tip-off he needs, he sees fit to ensure his informant's discretion and heads out with his wheelman towards the fortune lying in wait. 2 pirates setting sail for parts unknown. The film then transitions to its first full episode named Jenna after its leading lady. This is the odd man out because it was never featured in the books. It's an original addition for this anthology. Overhearing her mother's plans to admit her to a mental health facility after already having been previously institutionalized, Jenna runs away from home with eyes towards Los Angeles. Her mother's concerns were not unfounded, though, considering Jenna's condition. The 2 things she can't seem to escape are the symptoms of her misophonia, an acute sensitivity to sound, as well as the paranoia of being watched and pursued by someone. Both these anxieties even drive her to prematurely exit the bus on her way to the big city. She instead opts to shack up at a local B&B run by a sweet elderly husband and wife. A folksy couple providing lodging for strangers. Well, that didn't work twice in the Wolverine trilogy. In the 3rd film, Logan, an entire rustic family was slaughtered by the Wolverine clone X-24, and if you're wondering what disaster befell the couple in the 1st film, well, that movie was X-Men Origins Wolverine, a disaster in its own right. Jenna's sensitivity to hearing turns into hallucination of bugs, and nightmarish head trips leave her questioning reality. Even when awake, though, and because of her sensitivity to sound, Jenna begins to hear scratching in the walls. Ever since A Nightmare on Elm Street, People Under the Stairs, and Pulse, all Wes Craven movies, by the way, the thought of people in the walls has always been a thoroughly creepy premise to me. It's not until after her panic attack and her hostess opening up to her that Jenna reveals her own dark past. It was a nice touch that they would pair a mental patient on the run with a retired nurse running a bed and breakfast. She really does fit the role of Angel of Mercy. It had a feel like an episode of the Hannibal TV series with how the nurse fostered her patients. All the ingredients fittingly pieced together by the end of the puzzle to display the full picture. I do feel, while still a good story, considering it was given the most time, it should have been more impactful. In the following chapter, university psychic researcher and skeptic Mary is a mother in mourning for her child. She seeks to close that chapter of her heartache, but instead is given hope when she herself is read like a book from the most unlikely of sources, one that runs counter to her professional employment. In episode 2, titled Miles, An intruder by the name of Simon is found sitting in Mary's office with a message from her deceased son. Having debunked many a medium, this one obviously hits a bit too close to home, which taints her resolve to disprove Simon, as she takes this latest case very personally. Too personally, it seems, as one garish incident validates Simon as the ghost whisperer, and the two share in their grief and become romantically involved. The message, though, from beyond the grave, extends an offer to Mary to help her cope with a new pain that Simon's involvement has caused her. Simon says, "Suffer." One thing that I noticed is that Anna Friel, who plays Mary, is gorgeous. The only critique that I have of this chilling standout episode is I do feel that the time this tale was given was used well. It's just that its resolution needed to marinate a bit longer. Catching up with our thieves on the run as they exit civilization and close in on their prize, they're now entering the wrong side of the tracks. Things escalate dramatically, and not in the best way that serves the story. The outcome of the partner in crime, the wheelman, feels rushed, as does the entirety of the last story, to be honest. The central figure feels more like a stand-in for the plot to be explained to than a fleshed-out character. Excuse the pun. Despite this, the mood and setting are the best parts. I do like the aftermath of an abandoned city turned ghost town, a city reclaimed by restless spirits, especially once you've seen what triggered the exodus of its citizens in the preceding story. The town is avoided by the living because it now belongs to the dead. After a spot of car trouble, the thief Bennett, who this story is named after, proceeds on foot to his destination. As it turns out, it's the house from episode 2, and this crook has gotten more than he bargained for. When he realizes that he's looking right at the Book of Blood, he's informed that it's looking back at him. Just as the third episode was getting interesting, it ended. Additionally, this story didn't have much motivation, no real thrust to it. I get that the prize that the burglars sought was supposed to lead them to their fortune, but I don't think you can have an effective chapter if you have bare-bones plot, no character development, and bland acting. The Last Call was indicative of the anthology as a whole, specifically its pacing issue. I felt with Chapter 2, it rushed its resolution a bit, and the Bennett closing story wasn't given enough time to breathe. Considering that about half of the film's runtime went to Chapter 1, that probably took much needed time from the Last Call story. Based on every appraisal that I have read or heard, I appear to be in the minority on two separate fronts with this film. First off, other reviewers liked the first episode the most, whereas I preferred Chapter 2. I very much enjoyed the double twist that the story had, especially the ending, which is just the right type of morbid that I like for my Clive Barker stories. The predatory nature is like something out of the Frighteners film, and you really feel for the grieving mother whose sorrow was toyed with. The thought of a skeptic having been exploited just to be handed the means for her own revenge makes for a delicious slice of irony on a dish best served cold. Secondly, a common thread from multiple sources brings the quality of acting into question. I don't know what anthology film y'all were watching, but I saw solid performances from episode 1's Jenna, from the lead dealing with psychological struggles and the hostess of the B&B, as well as the protagonist in Chapter 2, Miles, coping with loss. Now, the thief of the closing story, Bennett, had such wooden delivery you could have swapped that actor out for a floor panel without noticing the difference. I do feel the score is a bit flat for this movie, and a better soundtrack could have elevated the ambiance. I like this anthology, but I don't believe it'll do much for non-Barker fans to reel them in, which is a shame. It's apropos that the movie opens on a getaway car en route to a burglary because the film then shifts gears towards its longest story, switches lanes to Chapter 2, rounds back to the robbery in progress, and then comes full circle on Episode 1 to close the book on this anthology. It's something of a Goldilocks effect. The first episode's too slow, the tipping point of the second is rushed, so by the time the baton is passed to the closing chapter, what should have been a relay race becomes a 20-yard dash. The stop-start effect of the film's beginning and end makes for a bit of a noticeably awkward jolt and stunt its own momentum. From a narrative perspective, it's fine to interweave your episodes, just not at the cost of the story's drive. I do hope that the director Brannon Braga does get to adapt more stories to screens. Perhaps Clive Barker can have more direct involvement in their execution, and that the powers that be take the constructive criticism of fans. The addition of a little more bite to the material and smoothing out pacing issues will give these books the means to pave the road for new chapters.
Warn your friends. Warn everyone.